So what is laid out right now is we're talking about disorientation. Like initially, I give this illustration of me being disoriented, and then I try to quickly explain Jordan Peterson's model for orientation because that gives us some language. It gives us a framework that we can use to talk about the process that I think is clear and true. And then we go into the primary question. And the point of the primary question, the point of that section is I'm trying to discuss orientation and specifically what happens when you've built your life on something and you think that you're well oriented, but that whole thing comes crumbling down all the way down to the very bottom. If you want to start from scratch, where do you start? And I think the answer is with this primary question, which is the reality that I've been born into good? And if it is, then what's it good for? And hopefully I've made that case well enough for it to make sense. So in response to that primary question, I think we have three choices. And I think they are true choices because since reality is bigger than what I can wrap my head around, I can't know for sure. So I have to make a judgment about this thing that I'm incapable of judging. And so it's that gap of ignorance that creates our freedom to choose to place a bet with our life, to either decide that reality is not good or to decide that it is, or to avoid the question. So what I'm interested in talking to you two about today is, do you think that it's true that we do have three decisions? Like, does it make sense that these would be the three decisions? So number one, indecision. I'm not going to answer the question. Number two, this reality is bad, so I'm going to condemn it and protest against it. And then number three, I'm going to hope in the fundamental goodness of this reality, which then later, that's kind of the case that I'm going to make later. That points us to being true to reality, trusting kind of the direction that it points us in, and trusting that that's meaningful. And then, so are those the right three? Are there three options? Am I defining them correctly? And am I characterizing them correctly? So in my notes, I characterized indecision as cowardly. I received some feedback on the first call today that characteristic might not be quite right. And I think that they really had a point that I can share with you guys if you're interested. They said, I said that condemnation and protest is arrogant. I still think that's true, although the call this morning said that maybe that is something that I might want to characterize as cowardly. It might be true that it is properly characterized as cowardly, and then hope. So we ended up having a good discussion about this morning. I'd like to know what you two think.
So I'm trying to think about that. So, I mean, I guess I understand where they're coming from, because essentially if I can just say that the world is bad, I can also essentially release all responsibility I have to make it good.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Which is to me, always avoiding responsibility is a cowardly thing to do, because it's pretty much saying, right, I don't have it can't be made better. If it's inherently not good, then I can just go and live my life selfishly and do whatever I want, outside of any moral obligation to do good, because reality is already bad. You know what I mean? So I understand that, but I don't know. I would have to think about it, because I feel like I can kind of see both characterizations being a little bit true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what they said in the morning, that's a good point. And nobody actually made that specific point this morning. But what they said was indecision might be ignorance. Kyle used the example of, he said, it's like you're building the roof before you lay the foundation. And that might not be cowardice. You might just be ignorant. You might just be kind of stupid. Like you might just think that you actually can build your roof before you lay your foundation, and maybe it's necessary for you to see that come falling down before you're even aware. Maybe you're just naive, and that it's only after that that you condemn and protest against it that you're being cowardly because I don't know. I mean, I guess maybe they were getting at the responsibility thing, but they didn't say exactly that. But we talked about when I was a banker and I left to start my business. I didn't know what business to start, so I started asking people, "Why do you do what you do?" Because I was hoping to discover an unmet need, so that I could then build a business to meet that need. So I started asking, "Why do you do it that you do?" Everybody eventually said, "I'm doing this to make money," because I was in banking and the people around me were in banking. That's why they decided to do it. Very few people feel like passionate and like purposeful, like they're serving the world by doing investment banking. And so then I started asking, well, if I gave you $100 billion and deposited in your account today, what would you do? And surprisingly, everybody said, I would travel. Everybody, every single person said, I'd leave and I would travel. And then I started asking, if I gave you $100 billion and then you spent the next 10 years traveling until you went everywhere that you ever wanted to go in total luxury and you're completely satisfied, then what would you do? And every single person was stumped. It's like, I've actually, this dream of travel is what has kept me on the hamster wheel. And I've never even asked myself what would happen if it were fully satisfied. So it's like this, I'm like floating. I'm groundless. There's no reason for me to do what I'm doing, but it keeps me so busy that I don't have to look underneath and come to terms with the fact that it's so groundless. So there's some innocence to that, but there's also some, yeah, I don't know. So I'll think about how exactly to frame it. What's the right way to frame it?
I kind of went through and made some small notes. I guess I can read my response specifically. It was so we can cower in lukewarm indecision, arrogantly condemn and protest against reality, or humbly, courageously hope in the fundamental goodness of reality. And my response to that was, I like these responses. I think they encompass a lot. I don't know if they encompass everything, but they seem to lay a great base into hashing out more specific details and ways of navigating reality. And in my opinion, I think we all utilize these responses in various ways throughout navigating our lives or our realities, whether they're conscious, unconscious, or subconscious. So for me, my understanding of it is the goal seems to be bringing these responses into the constant light of consciousness, like in order to understand the whys behind why certain situations invoke those types of responses. And then the other thing I said to that was, it seems like putting the humble, courageous hope before the other responses and doing this consciously, consistently, and accurately is kind of the way to go. And my response to that is like, it feels better. With that humble, courageous hope. So, I mean, it seems like that's the one you potentially might want out of the three. That makes sense to me, but then that draws in the aspect of faith. So when you say hope, I'm kind of viewing that as faith at the same time.
Yeah.
So like they're kind of, very similar. But then there was the other section of condemning and protesting reality as arrogant. And I think you could use ignorant too. I mean, I think there's a lot of like complex characteristics that they could be both. But then for me, it's just, I think it's dependent on the situation, like how aware of the protesting, are you really? Because if you don't understand the why, that would be more ignorant. If you're condemning or protesting, right? If you don't understand it, that seems like more ignorant to me than it is like arrogant. The arrogance would be like you think you know why, and then because of that why, you think you understand everything to that degree, and it doesn't add up to what you want or the way that you think reality should be, and then you condemn it and protest it. That to me seems more of like an arrogant thing to do, because you're like consciously aware that like this isn't the way that I want it to be. And I think he had it. There was a portion in there in one of the sections that you said. I can't remember where it is at. But that's kind of where I was trying to understand it. I like that aspect of condemning and protesting reality. Reality exceeds comprehension. Each of us is a part of reality. Therefore, not only are we not qualified to judge reality, but further, we cannot condemn reality without condemning ourselves and our own judgment. Like, I like that a lot. And then, if that is the understanding, I think it would force yourself to, be accountable and responsible for your own choices and actions. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me, because I'm like, well, yeah, it's like if you can't, if it's uncomprehensible, but the fact you're trying to sum it all up and then you make certain judgments on it, well, then you definitely have to, get sucked back into yourself and make judgments on yourself at the same time. But I don't think that always happens,
Well, it's interesting. I think so. The first part of your comment was that this happens moment to moment, or like we can bring these filters in different moments of our lives. We can interpret reality through each of these filters in different moments of our lives, because basically what each of them is an interpretive axiom to interpret the meaning of something that I'm experiencing. And meaning is implication for action. So like if I'm driving down the highway and there's 4 bushes in front of the dentist office instead of 3, it's like, I don't need to know that. It's true, but it's not meaningful. Like, it's not false, but it's not something that, it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter because it's not necessary for me to act in response to that. It's not meaningful. There's no implication for action. And so when I'm asking what is, that is the same as asking what's the implication for action. And the reason why is because we ask what is so that then we can ask what should be, or where should I go? What should I do? So we're seeking not just random facts, not just like whatever, not just random facts, 4 bushes instead of 3 at the dentist office, but something to tell me what I ought to do. And so then it seems to me that we can't have that in any form without making an assumption or choosing an axiom that what is true is necessarily good, or what is true is necessarily bad, like fundamentally. So that like somebody like the condemnation and protest, the example that I think of in my mind when I think of that option is somebody like the Uvalde shooter or the Columbine shooters, who decide, I hate this life, I hate being here, I don't want to be here, I didn't consent to this, and so I'm going to get my revenge against reality by murdering people and then killing myself. And I guess it takes a lot to get to that point. That's something that you have to practice to get that deep into it. But it is something that can creep in even moment to moment, even after I've chosen, I'm going to have faith, I'm going to hope in the fundamental goodness of reality, because then something shows up that's maybe worse than anything I've ever experienced before. And my commitment to that decision is tested. Like, okay, Zach, you thought that, but now you've been diagnosed with terminal cancer. Is that really your answer? Are you really sure that this reality is good? Is that how you're going to interpret this new event? Because that's not an easy thing to do. So, and it can happen in less dramatic ways too. So that was a good point. I like that. And I think maybe one other thing, and this is an idea that I'm going to pull in, I think in the next couple of sections, is what does it mean for something to be good and what does it mean for something to be bad? And I think a pretty easy definition is what is good should be, and what is bad should not be. If something bad is happening, it should stop. If something good is happening, it should continue. So good should be, bad should not be. And then evil is something that aims at the bad. Evil aims to bring something that should not be into being, which is an example, or which is sort of what's underneath something like the Uvalde shooter or the Columbine shooters. It's like I'm aiming to bring the murder and suffering of innocent people into being as protest against being, because it is. So it's like I don't get to decide if it's good or if it's bad to like murder kids in a school. That's just reality. Like it is bad to do that. You should not do that. And it's not just my opinion. That there's some kind of morality to which I am subject. You know, it transcends me. It transcends Daniel. It transcends Megan. And I was born into that without my consent. And so since certain things are good and certain things are bad, like I would like to just live my life however I want with no consequences, but there are certain consequences. I'm free to make my decisions, but I'm not free to choose the consequences of those decisions. And I never consented to that deal. And so I could be born into this reality and say, I don't like the fact that I can't do this. I don't like the fact that there's certain consequences for like negative consequences for doing the things that I want to do. And so I hate the thing that made these rules and placed me under them. That was unjust. And so then I'm going to protest against that by bringing something bad into being, by bringing something that should not be into being. And then I'm going to leave because I don't want to be here.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm just curious, like, why, how do I say this? So I think that like the descriptors of the perspectives of reality make sense, and like people understand what those are. What's the reasoning behind like the need to label them? So like, what do you think that adds? I mean, I think that like the humble and courageous like hope makes sense, especially because like I think that's the one you're saying is like what we're essentially going to try to pursue and like learn how to have that like through the book. But I was thinking about like the one where it's like, oh, reality is just bad. And I feel like a lot of different things can drive that. And like maybe I need to think a layer deeper, and like maybe arrogance is involved in all of them. But like I was kind of just writing down like I think that sometimes it can be driven by like despair or hopelessness, right? Like people with a lot of empathy can look at the world and see that everything's bad, right? And like to be in that state of like, I have a lot of empathy, I can't see what's good, like the world around me seems bad. And so I'm just going to accept the world is bad and then like remove myself from feeling like I can change it, right? Because like the problem seems so overwhelming, it seems so big that like this empathy I have and I can't even change anything. So instead I'm just going to accept that it's bad and focus on myself and like pursuing things that make me happy and feel good, right? So I'm like kind of thinking that I feel like maybe there's more than arrogance that can like drive that perspective.
Yeah,
I would
that's
agree with
good.
that. I think like specifically everything you just said, I have a few friends that they struggle with that, being very empathic.
Almost like you want it to be good, but you haven't found what would convince you that it's good.
Well, I guess they can like almost wholeheartedly put themselves in like whatever situation comes about. So if something really negative happens to someone they know, like they will take on all of that emotion. I know a few people like that, and then they go into complete disarray and despair because they don't have there's nothing there to navigate it, which you know maybe they don't have maybe like a spiritual or religious backing They've kind of put that on the side. Like they still have, I don't know. That's how I always viewed it, as like, for me, in order to navigate when those types of things happen, you know, if it's for me specifically, or even friends or family or whoever, you try to put yourself in their shoes and, you know, do whatever you can to, you know, do the best you can to help them, or try to get them in a proper mindset outside of that negativity, because, you know, like everybody kind of knows, they have an inkling. My word for that would be like intuition. So that would go into the morality part of it. It's like, I think everybody does have a moral compass or a moral code, but I've always viewed that as kind of intuition. But I've never really had a super deep conversation into that concept, you know, where they know, like everybody knows when the thing is really bad, but the thing they don't know how to do is fix it, or they want to fix it.
Yeah. Well,
So
like
that's why
the reason I kind of started like thinking down that path was because I was like trying to take it from like the macro reality to like a small example that like I could relate to. And I was thinking about living in San Francisco, and like I like San Francisco, right? Like I want to say it's a good place. But just this morning while I was waiting on the bus, this cracked out lady was literally standing 3 feet away from me, like screaming at the top of her lungs, like yelling at some invisible person, and like out of her mind for like 10 minutes. And then I get on the bus and there's this other crazy guy on the bus screaming. And I'm just like, this city is so fucked. You know what I mean? And like, and I do have like I do feel like I'm fairly like oriented in the world. And yet like, what do you want to do when you see like that lady and you're like an empathetic person? You want to go up and be like, the world is good. Like I have goodness in me. Like I can impact this person. But the reality is like, I can't. And so like in that moment, it's kind of like, I think a natural human response in a lot of ways is to be like, this is just so bad that there's no fixing it. And then all of a sudden, like, I feel bad that I couldn't help that lady because like, it wasn't a path I could have even chosen. It's something that's like impossible. You know what I mean?
Yeah, good point. This kind of point is exactly why I asked y'all to kick the tires with me, because that hadn't occurred to me, but you're totally right.
So it's kind of when you should add descriptors on like the certain concepts, because I think that like that definitely like helps, or maybe like adding a story in there that gives it a varied context. Because I think the concepts are like they are so huge. They are like the concepts are macro. So then that, you know, me trying to understand all that, it's like, you know, I'm dissecting from my own personal experiences, or potentially experiences that I've had with others, or maybe stories they've shared that, you know, are within the realm of making sense within that concept. But I've found myself kind of wanting like the micro descriptors. Does that seem right, Megan?
Yeah, that makes sense. I guess like, yeah. And part of the thing I was thinking about is like, okay, let's say I'm one of those people that like haven't found like the orientation that allows me to have like hope and be like humble and courageous, you know, all of that. So if I read this line and I'm like, well, I honestly think the world is bad. And then I'm like arrogant, like I'm not arrogant. No. And then it kind of like turns me after the concept. But I think that like people can identify within themselves why do I avoid deciding if reality is good or bad? Why do I think reality is bad? Like, I think they fill that in as they read it. Like, we kind of know what our drivers are. But when I read like humble, courageous hope, regardless of where I find myself on the spectrum, I'm like, well, of course I want that, because those are like positive things that most people would aspire to be, like humble and courageous, right? Like everybody wants to be that. But if I read like the second one and I'm like, oh, well, you've already missed the mark because like I believe reality is bad, but also I'm not arrogant and like that's not what this is, then I think it kind of like creates a disconnect between you and the reader.
Good point.
Yeah,
so
what
the
other
original,
what other words could you add into that?
well,
So like there's arrogance, ignorance. Like, could there be other? Do you need to add other things, like to expand that?
The original question that you asked, Megan, and I think I'll hopefully get around to what you just said, Daniel. The original question you asked is, why are you characterizing these responses? So like basically, hey Zach, I don't have a problem with you saying like ignore the question or good or bad. Those seem like the right categories. But when you say arrogant, for example, or ignorant, maybe you're maybe that's inappropriately narrow.
Mhm.
So if it is inappropriately narrow, I don't want to say it because I only want to say it if it's true. But I am curious to know, is there a fundamentally true way to characterize this? Like if it were true that it were one of these ways, I would want to say it. I wouldn't want to,
Mhm.
even if it would, I'm not writing this in order to turn somebody off, but if it's true and I say it and if it turns somebody off, then I'll accept that as a consequence. I don't want to be a I don't want to be a troll. I don't want to be needlessly provocative. But
Mhm.
I think if it's true to characterize it a certain way, then I can do that confidently, then I want to.
Yeah.
And as I think about your example, Megan, I actually think that there is equal arrogance, even in the empath who looks at the situation. It's a completely different kind of reaction, like polar
Mhm.
opposite from somebody who, I hate this and so I'm going to go shoot up a school versus this is terrible. I feel the pain of everybody else and I'm in despair and I just feel really sad and I sort of shut down. Polar opposite reactions, but I think actually equally arrogant because who are you to say this cannot be redeemed? Like, who are you to say that this isn't just? Who are you to say that this isn't how it should be? Like, what do you know?
Mhm.
Who are you to say that this is hopeless? What do you know? I don't think that you have any more right to say that this is that reality is oppressing me and so then I should get revenge than you do to say reality is oppressing me and so then I should shut down. In both cases, you're condemning reality. You're just reacting to that condemnation differently. And I think any condemnation of reality is arrogant because reality necessarily exceeds our comprehension.
Mhm.
It's just a different kind of arrogance.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I had to look up arrogance real quick. It was just like having a revealing and exaggerated sense of one's own importance or abilities.
Yeah.
So I mean yeah, that's where it gets really, complicated for me because it's just I think the human beings are so complex, so we're all gonna have different ways of assessing, what arrogance is. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right, Megan? Is like someone might view arrogance as this type of arrogance, and then it's like, well, yeah, like where are there different varieties of arrogance, and what are those? I don't
Yeah,
know. I mean,
that
I agree with
definitely.
that statement only because I mean I like that. I like I don't know if arrogant. I think I'm viewing it from my point of view. Like if I'm condemning or protesting reality, it is arrogant because with the understanding that we are a part of reality by default because we're here. So to condemn other aspects of reality without condemning ourselves, that's the arrogant part. Like just flat out like that. I understand. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Like I'm
But
good, but reality's bad.
yeah, but it's just kind of. But that's
So-
like that's through accepting that understanding. That's how I make sense of it. It's like, okay, yeah. I mean, I guess I like that because it forces you to think that way. But that doesn't mean that everybody's going to do
Yeah,
that.
I
That's
feel
where
like
it gets
that.
complicated too.
Yeah, that definition you gave kind of made me think of it in this way. Like if I use arrogance as like the orienting factor of like how different
Mhm.
people look at reality. Reality is bad would be I know best. Like I know and I can define this thing. Not choosing would be like I don't have the power to know, but also nothing out there has the power to know. Therefore, like it's neutral, like nobody can define if reality is good or bad. Like the courageous hope about reality being good is saying like I don't know, like I'm not big enough to know, but there is something that is like bigger that like made this thing good, right? Like I can have hope in the affirmative because I'm like admitting that because I'm coming from a place of humility. So I think like the middle one is like almost the second one, only like it's missing that like hope part, right? So like it's small distinguishing things. And I think that is that like concept that Daniel talks about, and then like that piece, I think it would be cool to like extrapolate a little bit in the chapter. And I think that maybe just like knowing that it's a little bit confusing or like more nuanced could be something that you dive into like when you talk about these topics in greater depth, like in the actual chapter itself.
And so just to make sure that I'm understanding, I'm not 100% sure I'm downloading everything that you just said. Is your point that I need to extrapolate what, or like just explain what exactly do I mean by arrogant, because that can be misunderstood? Is there more that you're suggesting than that?
I think all of them, just kind of like, I think that a characterization is fine if you kind of explain like what do you mean by
each
that
of the responses?
Yeah, because I think like that definition that Daniel gave of like what arrogance is, like I think we all know, but I also think when I picture arrogance, like without that definition as a reminder, like it just feels like such a, I don't know, it's something you just used to describe people like very negatively. Whereas like
It's
that
harsh.
definition, yeah,
Yeah, it is.
it's harsh. But I think that the nuance is really important in terms of like how you characterize these.
Okay.
Like,
Cool.
they're
And
not
I guess
a
you could
horrible
say the
person
same
if
thing
they're a
about
little
cowardly.
arrogant.
Like cowardly is harsh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I think all three of them are like in that harsh ballpark, but I don't necessarily think that bad, because I think it's like it gets at the most extreme of the, of the responses. Like, so if you're, that's how I'm taking it, is like, I don't necessarily know if they're bad in terms of like not getting out all of the details within potentially how those could be received. But I guess I respond to like them being like the most exaggerated or the most extreme versions of like what arrogance can be, what ignorance can be, and then I lost it. What's your and not
courage?
And then cowardly. Yeah, cowardly.
Oh, cowardly. Yeah. I think.
But you do say it's lukewarm indecision. So like that's a pretty specific word to put before indecision. It's like there's some, and especially it's lukewarm. So then you're like, there's some like murky waters in there. Maybe murky isn't the way, but there's some other like ripple effect of like what's lukewarm. It's like, it's kind of there, but it's not, it's
right,
not,
right.
What temperature do you really want it to be at?
That's
ice
the one.
cold, too hot. I don't know. Yeah, I like the wording there. I mean, it makes sense, but it's making me think about all the variations of a person potentially being indecisive. But I guess that is that I don't really necessarily know what those are, and that'd be the same point. Megan's point is like, can you expect the reader to do that with all of those? Are they going to be doing that? I don't know.
I think what I might do is actually expand this into 3 different sections and start. So it would go kind of one man's shipwreck, like my personal example of disorientation, the Peterson model, and then the primary question, is reality good? If so, what's it good for? And then have 3 different sections to fully discuss our 3 possible responses to that one question. And they would be indecision, condemnation and protest, and hope. And so I've been thinking about the kind of the lukewarm option. And it's an interesting option because it's not actually a third option. Lukewarm indecision is a rejection of the question posed to us by reality. And in that way, it's an indirect, passive rejection of reality, whereas condemnation and protest is a direct, active condemnation of reality, because reality does ask us this question. Like, we are faced with this question. And so I think that there's maybe a period of time where you can be excused, where you're kind of innocent. And maybe I really think that going and building a gigantic business is the best thing that I can do with my life. But if I believe that, then I'll go do it. And once I do it, I'll realize, I built the roof before I laid the foundation, and something's off here, because this is not enough. It's not enough to justify the terrible things in reality. And that's a part of what forces us to address this question, is because there are so many terrible things in reality.
Mm-hmm.
If there are kids starving, if there is like genocide and murder and all of the worst things that we can imagine, if those things exist, then whatever justifies those things has to be incomprehensibly good. I mean, it has to be, what could justify a reality that permits torturing children or like raping children? How could you, if I told you like, hey, I have a plan, a few kids are going to get raped, but it's going to be worth it. It's like, that sounds like a disgusting thing to say. And yet that's what we're living in.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we are in a reality, terrible things happen all the time. How can I possibly believe that this reality is fundamentally good, that being is good if being allows these things to occur? The only way that I can maintain this lukewarm indecision, in other words, the only way that I can avoid answering the question, is I focus on something. So like, I accomplished this as an investment banker. It's like, I'm going to make money. I'm working 90 or 95 hours a week. So I just don't have time to think about anything else, which made me feel good. Because I didn't have to address these underlying problems. I could just focus on something that I knew there was a reward and I was good at it. And so I just keep myself occupied all the time. But it was once I made my money, like once I could see, it's like, I am good at this and my boss thinks I'm great. And so I have a future at this company. And if I keep doing what I'm doing, I'm going to make $1 million a year. Like 10 years down the road, I'll be making $1 million a year. And it's like, I have a guaranteed path to wealth. It's right in front of me. As soon as I could see that, I lost 100% of my motivation, because then I had to ask, why am I doing this? So, okay, I have it. I've achieved my goal. I've got money and I have a pathway to more money. But so what? And I realized I didn't have a so what.
But I think that's where honestly what like separates you and like why you ended up transforming into a different person, like separates. I think that's why it's, how do I say this? Like I think your point behind all this was that like both are arrogance. And I'm not saying that's completely wrong, but I think that's why I think like the cowardly piece is a better descriptor of this like middle kind of option. Because what you did, right, is you got to the end point of like, okay, so what? And then what you decided to do was like go down the path of like actually figuring out that question, right? What a lot of people do, and why I think that cowardice is a good descriptor, is they're like so afraid. I think they're afraid that maybe it's true that reality is not good, but like they don't know and they don't want to find out. And to them, like the risk finding out the reality is good. And so then they just keep adding a new, like that's where the whole like hamster wheel description of like career and money and stuff comes from. Because when they see the question, like it's like they take a left turn at the end of the hallway, they like see the question and then they're like, nope. And they make a U-turn,
Right.
And so that's why I think cowardice is like a good description, because it's like, you don't want to go all the way of asking the question and risk like finding out it's bad, but you also don't want to go the other way, like of potentially finding out it's good. So I don't know. I think that descriptor fits.
Cool.
I'd agree with that. There's fear is intermingled with that, and fear seems like it's been coming up in conversation throughout the discussions. I don't think anybody's really like elaborated on it too crazy, but I think it fits in with the cowardice.
Well, it's the monster parents.
Mhm.
because it's like I had the dream and I was like, maybe my parents are monsters in disguise. I don't want to ask them because maybe they'll say yes. And it would be better to play along and let them pretend that they're humans for a little while longer than it would be for them to realize they're busted and to eat me. So this hamster wheel thing is playing along. I'm going to play along with the charade
Hmm.
so that I don't have to face a reality that is meaningless and terrible that will then consume me and cast me into despair. So there's cowardice there, but there's also cowardice in. So it's like I'm an investment banker. I'm walking to get my lunch, and there's a homeless guy on the street asking me for money, and I tell him no. Like I'm ignoring this reality that's right in front of me so that I can stay on my hamster wheel. But if I would step back for a second, I would ask, why is it that I found myself in circumstances that allowed me to be a banker making a bunch of money, and then this guy is in circumstances where he's not, and then the obvious answer, to me then and to people in that situation, and this is a little bit unfair. I'm speaking pretty roughly when I say this, but the obvious answer to that is like, well, they've made bad decisions. So this person has made bad decisions that took them there. I made good decisions that brought me to where I am. And that's true everywhere in between, right? If somebody's making half as much money, maybe they're not homeless, but they're poor, then they've just made bad decisions. And I've made better decisions, like better economic decisions. Or maybe kind of speaking from a finance perspective, which I don't plan to do in the book, but like they value other things more than me. And so they're making economic trade-offs to acquire the things that they value most. I'm making economic trade-offs to acquire the things I value the most. And maybe they're not worse decisions, but they're just, aiming at something different, which is neither better nor worse. And so that's sort of how I explain inequality. But then it's like that response doesn't answer like a child being born with a brain disease that puts them in pain, day to day. It's like, did they make a bad decision to get there? Because if I had that brain disease, I probably would not be an investment banker. I probably wouldn't be able to work the way that I can. And yet that's a reality. So it's like, if you're willing to face the terrible things in the world, you can't sustain the hamster wheel. You can't justify the hamster wheel and still say reality is good. At best, if you're willing to face the terrible things in the world and you still want to be on the hamster wheel, you have to say reality is arbitrary. It's meaningless. Like some people are dealt bad cards, other people are dealt good cards. You play the cards you're dealt and you get what you can and then you leave. So this is kind of a hedonistic approach to reality, where it's like reality is neutral. It's neither good nor bad. And there's nothing in particular, there's nothing really good for me to do here except serve myself and pursue pleasure. But I still think that this is a cowardly response. There is some cowardice in that, and there's some falsehood in that, because how could reality be neither good nor bad if it arbitrarily puts people in a position to suffer, and if it arbitrarily puts people in a position to have like good pleasurable lives? That is at least unjust. And I don't see how an unjust reality can also be a good reality. An unjust reality would have to be a bad reality. You're just benefiting from a bad reality, which makes you a bad person. So I don't think that there's any avoiding a yes or a no answer if you're being honest and if you're willing to face the whole picture. And I also don't think that ignorance is an excuse for very long. Like any human being who lives into adulthood.
That was going to be my question. Is it seems like you're making the assumption that there is a time frame where everyone should be at that point, right? Where they have to more or less take accountability and responsibility for that. like they are a part of reality. They need to be aware of it. And they need to start making a choice, you know, regardless, whatever that is, but like there is a point where they have to start being being conscious of what it is that they're a part of, you know, because
You can't
I mean,
can't
that's
claim ignorance.
yeah, I mean, for me, because I deal with, you know, I teach high schoolers, so like that comes up all the time, but they are not, I cannot, it goes back and forth, and it's like kind of a day-to-day thing, but it's like part of my job is to have that conversation where it's like, are you guys actually aware of the choices and decisions that you're making? Like, are you aware of them? You know, it's like as simple as that question. Like, no, like seriously though, like look me in the eye and like tell me, like, are you thinking about this? And like why you chose to make that decision? Because you made one, but like how far are you going with it? Or like how far do you want to go with it? That's where, you know, my vocabulary, my language is always like, are they conscious or unconscious, or is it subconscious? Because I'm around high schoolers all day long, and you know, some seem like they're a little bit farther along. And you know, I would say me personally, I always thought I was always asking questions and I was always thinking, but I really didn't feel like I was conscious of it until I was like 21 or something, you know, where I was like, oh, you know, there was some eye-opening experience. But I don't know if you know, it's like I don't know if everybody has that. And those are conversations that I've had, you know, from previous educations and stuff, is that does everybody get there? You know, like is there, but that would be where it is. I understand the concept of cowardice or ignorance to that, is that you are a part of reality. So there should be a time, like there should be a time where you need to start thinking and asking those questions. Because if everybody did that, it seems like it would make things a little bit more accessible to understand, because then everybody would be on the same playing field mentally, where it's like we're at least asking the question and making the choice to do a thing. But that's something that I haven't experienced like in any great depth yet at this point in my life, is that it's a conscious thing for everybody. And those are conversations, you know, I've had that conversation a few times, like, you know, you don't know if everybody, like, you don't know if anybody or if everybody gets there. You know, there might be people that are like, I guess what you're saying, they're moving through they're on the hamster wheel, but they're not necessarily asking why they're on the hamster wheel. So is that that's how I'm starting to understand it. So they've made choices to be a part of the hamster wheel because of culture and society and the people, the family, everybody they've been around, to, you know, all the learned environments or learned behavior they've been around throughout the course of their life. It kind of helps you become who you are to a certain extent, like if that's reasonable to say. But you're on, like, you become part of the hamster wheel or on the hamster wheel. But I think, you know, like my understanding is that people just stay on the hamster wheel, like whatever, you know, they just kind of grab whatever those things are without really asking the deeper questions as to why. But then that would go to Megan's point of that fear of not wanting to dip outside, you know, or potentially sacrifice what they might have or something that they might potentially get. Is that what you're getting at, Megan? Am I understanding that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think I understand, if I'm understanding correctly, Zach's point of like there is some crossover, right, between like the motivations of the two. But I do think that, like, even though I think there are several components that play into the decision to kind of like embrace like one of these three paths, I do think there's like a core driver of each one. And like after talking about it, I think that Zach, like, nailed the core drivers. Like, I do think it's arrogance for the first one. I do think it's like cowardice for the second one. And this is like probably a simplistic answer. I really like everything Daniel said, but like the bottom line for me is that I honestly love the idea that you suggested to do 3 sections on all of them, because
Yeah,
I just think they're
yeah.
really nuanced, and I think the fact that we've like literally been able to talk about this topic for an hour like shows that I don't know, I don't think it's something you should try to like oversimplify. I think it's like worth diving
Mhm.
into.
Cool.
Yeah.
Good.
I would agree with that.
All right. Awesome. Well, 5:59, that's probably a great place to wrap it up. Thank you both so much. This has been super helpful. And will definitely inform the way that I write this section. I think that was some really good feedback. And
So
it's
plan-
something that
Are you planning on doing another meeting next week, and then it's through Christmas that you're gonna have off for the weekend?
let's see what I've got scheduled. I think I'm just skipping. So next weekend, yes, we will meet. So that's the 10th, yes. The 17th, yes, we will meet.
Okay.
The 24th is Christmas Eve, so we will not meet. And then the next is the 31st, which is New Year's Eve, so we will not meet. And that the invitations that I sent out will show that on your calendar.
Yeah, cool.
So
Thank you guys for being awesome.
this is
Back
fun.
at
Yeah.
yeah.
No.
All right.
Yeah. Did you have everybody else on the? How many people showed up for the first meeting? Because I feel like I missed that. And there's a lot of people on there. Because I want to say that to everybody, but I gotta get on the same discussion post. Because I listened back to last week's, and I was like, damn. You guys were having intense, like there were intense conversations. It was crazy.
Yeah, it was cool. It got to hang on late with Marino and Ashley, and yeah, we had some really great conversation. This morning, this weekend, a lot of people did not show up, so I'm hoping that's not going to be a pattern. But even if it's the three of us at 5 p.m. on Saturdays, I'd be happy with that because this is still great, and it just means that we all get to, just kind of ping pong back and forth a little bit more.
Yeah,
which is good. Yeah, Megan. I don't know if you've read Habakkuk lately. It looks like he froze up. It's a great book of the Bible. It's only 3 chapters long. It's really good. And it's related to what we're talking about today.
What is it?
It's Habakkuk.
I think hold on.
It's one of the prophets, one of the Old Testament prophets. But the gist of the chapter is, God, how can you let these terrible things happen in this world? And then God responds.
Oh. I always think
you could read it and
go back and look at the chapters or the books I haven't read in a while because I just write the funniest things. I want to see if I wrote anything in this one. Oh.
Well, yeah, Zach, thanks for sharing. In the note section, thanks for sharing some of the verses from John. Hey, Matthew, I just started reading the New Testament. That was the other thing. I mean, I never really say that, but my mother's side of the family and more or less my father's side, they're Pentecostal Christians from Greenville, South Carolina. So I've been immersed in that world as well for like a long period of time. And I've been making my own like route to it, but I appreciate you sending those things because it kind of puts me back into thinking that way. So thank you for sharing those things. But I got to run to the hardware store and get some brad nails. So thank you guys.
Stay warm.
Again. Yeah, it's going to be cold. I'm going to let the car warm up for a bit, but yeah. See you guys.
Bye.
All right, bye.